GOP candidate Vivek Ramaswamy told associates that Newsmax tried to make him pay for coverage. This is according to new reporting in Semaphore. During a recent call, Newsmax's Chris Ruddy allegedly told Vivek Ramaswamy that if he wanted more airtime on the network, he should buy ads, like Perry Johnson, a low-polling candidate who was heavily featured on Newsmax. It seems the millennial presidential hopeful doesn't quite need the coverage, however. Ramaswamy has enjoyed a recent bump in the 2024 polls, even tying with the once formidable Ron DeSantis, according to some surveys. Rasmussen poll shows that without President Trump, Ramaswamy polled in first place among GOP primary candidates with 24%, edging out DeSantis by 1 percentage point. DeSantis polled at 23%, both candidates eclipsing the competition by double digits.
Ramaswamy's unconventional campaign, nonetheless, continues to land him in the hot seat. CNN's Caitlin Collins confronted the candidate about recent comments he made suggesting the federal government was somehow involved in the attacks of September 11th. Let's watch.
But there's a difference in asking questions about Saudi Arabia's involvement and the government's involvement and then pushing this idea that whenever what your comment about who was on the plane and then was 9/11 an inside job where you did not say no earlier. That's why it's important to clarify those comments, because otherwise it feels like you're towing the line when it comes to conspiracy theories.
Caitlin, I am guilty as charged that I do not follow the establishment super PAC donor-approved script on these questions, but I am speaking truth, grounded in fact, at every step of the way, and that's what's really elicited something of an anaphylactic reaction of the kind we saw in 2016 against a different candidate. But this time, I'm going to be grounded in principles and conviction, not just vengeance and grievance.
So that was a very heated exchange. And I was trying to come to it as someone who didn't already have my kind of political biases. Obviously, I have very strong policy agreements with Vivek Ramaswamy, disagreements rather. And it is true that Caitlin Collins was asking him a series of adversarial questions, talking about those things that he has said that she knows are going to be controversial to his audience. His statements about 9/11 being a prime example. And so I understand on some level emotionally why he might be frustrated with that line of questioning. But in Caitlin Collins' defense, it is also subjects that he has chosen to bring up repeatedly. She didn't go into some yearbook comment from his 2003 high school tome and bring something up.
Did he choose to bring it up when it got brought up? I thought he got it. He's been very willing to appear on all sorts of not just mainstream programming, conservative programming, and also podcasts, alternative platforms. I think he just, and if you do that, you can get asked, you get off questions a little bit that are off the script. I think he got one and he said something.
I feel like that, I know the podcast clip you're referring to, but my understanding was that that person asked him about this subject because it had come up before. So I don't know if it was initially prompted by a question and then it kept getting prompted by questions. That could be true. But at this point, it's out there enough that I do think it's fair game to ask about. And Caitlin, again, in Caitlin's defense, he could have just said, no, I don't think 9/11 was an inside job. This is a much longer exchange than what we showed. And
he did effectively. He said that. Maybe he didn't.
No, he did. But that's what I'm trying to get to. Eventually, after being pressed repeatedly by Caitlin Collins and after, frankly, responding to her in a very hostile way, you can say it was justified that he was so hostile, but I don't think it's subjective that he was very, taciturn with her. He eventually says, yes, of course, I don't think America did 9/11. And she's like, okay, great, then we can move on. And I guess what I'm asking you is, how do you think those kinds of exchanges are gonna land to the generalized audience? What is his pitch? How does he want to distinguish himself both substantively and in terms of tone and demeanor from people like Donald Trump, who similarly had very antagonistic relationships with female reporters, and particularly like Megyn Kelly very famously, or Ron DeSantis, who was supposed to be the more polished, erudite version of Donald Trump. Like Vivek is also, he's a Harvard grad who made his multi-millions of dollars in the biotech industry. But he seems to be falling somewhere between the two, and is that working?
Well, I mean, it is working. He's had a meteoric rise in the polls. I mean, we're still talking in a Republican primary context. I don't know. I don't have a good sense for how a general election audience would treat him or what they would make of his views. But he's even while talking about 9/11 and what happened, which is not a very important thing to do, not something to spend a lot of time on. But I think what he was trying to is signal that he doesn't just march in lockstep with establishment thinking, and he brings some degree of skepticism to a lot of questions, including a lot of foreign policy questions. And there's a huge and healthy appetite for that in Republican circles. Unlike DeSantis and more like Trump, he's willing to do interviews because he enjoys mixing it up, being in the fray. DeSantis, it's like his people thought, the right-wing people hate the media, they hate the press, so we're never going to talk to them. But Trump and the media profit, again, a Batman-Joker dynamic, and both profit from this public feud they have, and Ramaswamy understands that in a way that DeSantis doesn't at all, and it's showing in how well he's doing. That clearly conservative people, even people who love Trump and still prefer Trump and want Trump, feel respected and interested in Ramaswamy. So I thought it was interesting, the story that led this segment about Newsmax, which this is a pretty serious allegation. Newsmax has totally denied it, has said they were only, suggesting to him that he can pay for political ads like everyone else, not that there will be some quid pro quo. If he pays for political ads, he'll get more favorable treatment. But that is what the Semaphore reporting said, and I guess that comes from Ramaswamy people making that assertion, which is a very serious one, and Newsmax should really clear that up quickly.
Yeah, there's been so much litigiousness around Vivek Ramaswamy of late. He recently sued, I think successfully, the World Economic Forum for listing him as one of their young global leaders in 2021. Obviously, the World Economic Forum is a group that he has criticized sharply, and I think that someone raised, understandably, how are you so critical of this group when you were in fact one of the people that they celebrated? Now, getting them to take that down, I think doesn't really get to the underlying issue here, which is that up until recently, everything about his biography and the way he was living his life would put him with the Davos crowd. I think that he is the second wealthiest person in the Republican primary. He achieved all of that wealth in the biopharmaceutical development sector, which is a sector which, generally speaking, has come under a lot of scrutiny and suspicion from conservatives in recent years because principally of COVID and of people like Bill Gates in the space, who they feel like has an outsized influence on public policy. Going back to an earlier segment, this idea that a billionaire can have such outsized influence doesn't sound so good when it's someone that you don't like Bill Gates, as opposed to someone like Elon Musk. And it seems like Vivek is trying to negotiate his relatively short time on the public sphere and craft it in a way that seems consistent with the way that his life has been framed up until this point. And I'm interested to see how successful that effort will be as we continue to get to know him.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's straightforwardly part of the elite. As you point out, he has an elite education. He made a lot of money in these sectors. He doesn't, like DeSantis is almost trying to do populism and just sounds inauthentic. Whereas Ramaswamy, I don't know that he's quite, he does have some, whether he admits it or not, whether he admits that these are policy differences with Trump, he does have them. Like, he's talked about, still very much we're going to stop illegal immigration, total shutdown of illegal immigration. But he talks about how we need
the military to the border and use drones
on cartels. Yeah, but he said he wants more legal immigration. He's a bit more. He's trying to marry the new populist trends, I think, on some subjects where maybe he agrees with them on, like, foreign policy, things like that, with still, not a demonization of wealth or markets, because obviously he made his money that way. He wants to create, he's very against ESG, which is an attempt to really codify wokeness and DEI through some regulatory effort. So there's a government component there. So at least that's something to actually fight against, rather than what, DeSantis just like railing against what Disney is doing. Well, Disney's a private company. They can do whatever they want. I think he's found a more, I don't know, he's found a more thoughtful approach to some of these things that seems to be resonating pretty well with the Republican base. What else can I say?
Well, to be clear, when we say that he's had a meteoric rise, I do think it's largely that Ron DeSantis has had a meteoric fall.
Yeah.
Even the Rasmussen poll that had them tied, I think had them tied at 10%, which again is less than all of the Democratic challengers have pulled at some point, and never did they get breathless reporting about how Biden needs to be in trouble because Marianne Williamson's polling at 11. So
but I mean, if
grain of
Nikki
salt.
Haley had, risen from 1% to 10%, or Tim Scott or Chris Christie or any of them, it would be something to comment on.
Yeah.
It's something we're commenting on it even more because he was a, pretty. I mean, he wasn't unknown if you watch cable news, but he's a totally unknown as a political figure.
He's very much doing the Buttigieg strategy, it seems, of saying yes to every interview, and it's having an effect. And I think polls that demonstrate that Republican voters are open to somebody new, as long as it's not necessarily Ron DeSantis, he's taking advantage of, I think, some flexibility among the Republican base for some alternatives in a way that doesn't necessarily exist among Democrats.
Yeah.
Well, according to new reports, conjecture counting DeSantis out of the 2020 race is in fact premature. Iowa voters in the state's first primary polls show DeSantis coming in closer than it first may seem. That's a quote describing his fate there.
That's what he's staking the campaign on, as I've said a couple times now, is a favorable kind of upset win in Iowa. He's concentrating all of his efforts there, and he hopes to prevail there and then, use that to catapult to future successes. It's not out of the question that could happen. That's what, at this time I've said this before, but at this time in the race for 2008, Rudy Giuliani was the front runner for the Republican nomination. And then John McCain had an upset win in New Hampshire, and that changed the whole trajectory of the race. And then it kind of became a three-man contest between him, Romney, and Huckabee. And it was very much a situation where the most conservative voters were being split among Romney and Huckabee. If Huckabee had gotten out earlier, Romney probably would have still been the 2008 nominee. But they divided that in a Bernie Warren splitting up the vote for, that's just how the system works, and it's frustrating. But you wouldn't have predicted that McCain would be the nominee at this stage in that race. So it's still something could happen. Doesn't mean it's likely. It's just possible.
And it's worth noting there's so much we don't know about candidates. Like, for example, one of the prongs of Vivek Ramaswamy's agenda is to get rid of dismantle LBJ's Great Society programs, which principally included Medicare and Social Security. I do wonder if people like Caitlin Collins, if you think that she's a bad faith actor and going after him on things that don't really matter, I'd be inclined to agree only insofar as I think his desire to cut one of the most popular social safety net services for Americans probably matters more to her audience than his esoteric feelings about 9/11 and what happened there. So we'll see what happens if journalists start asking those kinds of questions about the substantive policies that are being offered by these candidates.
A lot of stuff he wants to cut. He wants to cut our foreign aid. He wants to cut, including to Israel. He wants to cut the Ukraine war budget. Interesting stuff coming from him. We'll continue to cover all of the candidates for 2024, and we'll have more Rising right after this.